He leaned forward a bit and pulled open a desk drawer, pulled out my snub-nosed 686 and pushed it across the desk barrel first. "Here, obviously we're letting you go." "I'm not sure I want to go, Chief." An hour or so later I was back at the safe house. The bodies had been removed, and following the phone calls on my behalf, a CURS 01Y investigation of the scene had done. All that was left now was to clean up the mess. I had explained to the chief that as far as it went, I wanted to appear to have been taken in and remained in custody until I could sort this out, at least for a day or two. Whoever was behind this would be off if I simply walked away from a setup like this. I would go back to the safe house and stay there. I asked them to impound the Chevy Cruze and take it to a storage facility that they normally use for impounds and check it out for a transponder. I had the Jeep if I needed it, and anyone checking the location of the Chevy by a issue of a transponder would assume that I was in jail and it had been impounded from the scene. He agreed. The safe house was equipped with cameras, 4 of them outside, and 5 inside. The outside ones had been spray painted over just like the ones at the apartments. Whoever did this came from the tree-lined perimeter and knocked out the cameras before ringing the doorbell and committing the murders. All the inside cameras had been disabled, obviously before the murders, as they recorded nothing dated after 9 in the morning of the murders, which happened just after noon. Marco must have disabled them for a reason or reasons unknown. It was getting late in the evening when I finally returned, so I pulled out rags, a mop and bucket, and began cleaning up. Obviously, I would have to miss my meeting with Don Guido the next day. The chief had agreed that afternoon to call Cusina Pazzo and inform them that I had given him their establishment as my of employment and that I was being held in Sedona regarding possible involvement in a crime. He said that they were being called just to verify my identity and place of employment. After cleaning up the mess, I checked out the kitchen, and since the outfit pampered its guests, I enjoyed a meal and a couple of glasses of wine, turned the lights out and went to bed. Tomorrow would be another day. The 686 was on the night table in easy reach. Before I fell asleep, I knew 2 things for sure. Marco deactivated the interior cameras, and whoever committed the murders knew Marco, and vice versa, or Marco would have never had opened that front door. In all the chaos of the last day, I had forgotten about meeting with Margot until I had met with the chief. She might have set me up, or possibly was a pawn in this thing. I had used my one phone call from jail, actually from the chief's office, to call her and tell her I was being held as a material witness to a couple of murders that I stumbled upon. A ruse, but I was interested in her response. "Sweetie," she said, "Don Angelo will get you out. I'll talk to him, and I'll bet he gets ball right on it. You didn't kill anyone, did you?" "Of course not, I just walked into the scene at the wrong time and got busted." How naive could she be? Even if I did murder them, the last place I would admit it was on a phone in the police department. "Talk to the Don, food here is tenable. But what about your concerns about your most important thing now is that you get back here to protect me, and I can thank you in my own special way for your services. Whatever they may be." Oh Christ, I thought, do they ever give up? After a few more moments I terminated the call, telling her that my time was up. Ball, as I recalled from my briefing, was the brother's attorney. I had told the chief to expect a call from him. Chapter 12. Ball definitely on the ball. Next morning, I got a call from the chief on my secure phone. Ball had called and inquired regarding my status. The chief had told him that I was being held as a material witness and would probably released within 24 hours following another interview or 2 and a statement. He had told him that there was no substantial evidence that I had committed a crime, simply in the wrong place at the time. He said Ball seemed satisfied with the explanation, and that was that. I thanked the chief for his cooperation, finished the call and tried to determine what my next move would be when I returned to Phoenix the next day. The chief arranged to have my Chevinsa delivered that afternoon to the now unsafe safe house, and he also told me when he called that he had his people go over the entire car, every inch of it, and they could not locate a transponder. So much for that theory. I still had to wonder if Marco had blown my cover on his cover trip down to Phoenix to play footsie with Julia and Margot. Chapter 13. Early the next day, Thursday, after I was technically released from custody, I upped the safe house and drove back down to Phoenix. I arrived back 10 o'clock, just a 100-mile drive. The next move to figure this out was obvious: talk to someone who likes to talk and might know something, ergo, Margot, besides trying to discern if she was indeed in danger. I called her from my apartment to tell her that I was back and said we needed to get together finally to discuss her concerns. "I hope I know for what," she said. "We can consider that, and I know what you mean, but first I'm trying to figure a few things out, including who has been making you feel that your life is at risk." 0k, but you are taking all oft fun out of your welcome home. No sense debating. I just said to come over that evening about 8 and we would have a few glasses of wine and talk things over. I would hope that nobody who knows the real me would get me wrong. I enjoy the company of women, especially professional ones who have made their success on the merit of their qualifications and not on their backs. Many I have had the pleasure of working for and with during my career. My ex for the moment fit exactly into that category: self-made, self-assured, and as a bonus, beautiful. We simply had a difference of opinion about lifestyles that we preferred and were taking one of our occasional time-outs. She was currently on her own and so was I. To be honest, the more I was around Margot and Julia, the more I thought about the woman who had been in my life. The Don's wives were like a throwback to Hugh Hefner's mansion of the 1970s, or again, a stereotype, what every reader of Playboy thought those women were like then, and maybe what the wives thought they were as well. Then, they were what they were, and I had to get somewhere with this, even if it were to save my own skin, so I would play along with Margot. Even if I wanted to Dudley do right in terms of what might be considered morals, on a practical basis, having sex with one of your boss's wives whose husbands were hooked up with the mob could have extreme negative consequences if it was found out, and these women talked about everything to everyone. So, anyway, I overthinking it. I went to the grocery store, bought some crackers, a good cheese, and a bottle or two of rather high-end red. Went home and sliced up the cheese and laid it out on a plate with the crackers. Polished a couple of glasses from my house that I had brought along when I relocated and prepared myself for fact-finding and toting to tastefully avoid seduction. Of course, there were the brothers. I had missed the meetings that week and obviously they knew why as far as the cover story went, but I was summoned to an early Friday afternoon meeting with Don Guido and a later with Don Angelo. Margot announced, and I was a bit surprised. She was dressed rather conservatively. Still beautiful, and a bit beyond that, but not at all that she had portrayed during our earlier meetings and telephone conversations. I poured a couple of glasses of wine and brought out the cheese and crackers. We were seated comfortably on either end of the couch, and I raised my glass. "Thanks for coming," I said. She raised hers. "My pleasure," she replied, "a good beginning. Look, I hope you can understand that I am somewhat confused. I just got out of jail, as you know, and thanks for getting Ball to call the sheriff on my account, but do you know what happened up there?" "No, just what you told me when you called from jail." I lied. "I got a call from Marco, and he asked me to come up to the B&B where he was staying for a while after he had taken care of his mother's burial. Said he just needed time to himself but needed to talk to me about some business that the brothers had asked him to take care of. Since I was filling in for him, I figured that I had better go like I told you before I left. Long story short, I got there and he and the woman who ran the place had been murdered. The cops showed up and figured I had done it, and I spent 2 days in the cooler before I finally was cleared. Marco, she said, her voice breaking, dead. Yes, I replied, and that's why I wanted to talk you about the concerns that you have about your safety. Look, you flilt, you are very attractive, but something is going on here and it is serious. I hope you understand that I can get very distracted by your invitations to indulge, but right now I'm very distracted for my safety and for yours, and I don't know what in the hell is going on. She sat her glass down on the coffee table and said again, Marco, dead. I nodded. And you are afraid for me? I nodded. A tear came to her eye, she wiped it away with the back of her hand, then leaned over the couch and softly kissed me on the cheek. Yes, I am, I reaffirmed. It was the first genuine emotion I had witnessed that this woman had expressed since I first had met her. I got up and got a tissue from a box in the bedroom and brought it back and gave it to her. Now let's talk about this, I suggested. She both of her eyes and nodded. Chapter 14. She composed herself and looked extremely vulnerable for the moment, as she had but moments before. I'm sorry, she said, I don't usually fall apart. A few tears, I said, there's nothing wrong with that. For some people that may be true, but it's not the image I want to project. She daubed her eyes again. And what exactly is that? I was beginning to feel like my shrink Dr. Watt, but in a practical sense this approach could probably encourage her to share information, just as it does when Dr. Watt worked with me. Oh, you know. I only know what I've seen so far. And what was that? I decided to level with her. The way I saw you until a few minutes ago was as someone who used her physical beauty to her advantage and enjoyed the impression that it made, especially on men, but I would supplex se on women as well who you for that attribute. Shallow. I'd be less than honest if I said that you didn't seem so. I had the impression that you figured out way back when how to manipulate men and women to your advantage and frankly enjoyed it beyond just the material benefits. Sex, she asked. Yes, I think you use it, but also think that you really enjoy it. I believe that it affirms you. She nodded, then seemed to change the path for the moment. You don't seem like the kind of guy who usually works for my husband and his brother. Why all the questions? You don't seem like the streetwise types that normally are part of his world. Had a good shrink in prison, and she helped me deal with it, I lied. As far as the questions go, I have a selfish motivation to get to know you better. Besides you, I want to protect myself and find out who tried to kill me. As far as the psychological BS, I want you to feel like you can talk with me, I mean really talk with me so we can come to grips with our problems. As long as you aren't billing me a couple of $100 an hour for this, she quipped. Think you could afford it, but no charge except perhaps saving both of our lives in rhythm. She thought for a moment, then said, all right, Dr. Freud, I'm an open book, but I warn you this may not be easy for me, I mean. You want the soft questions first or the tougher ones? Another moment of consideration, then hit me with all you got. I started with a hard one. Why were you so upset when I told you that Marco had been murdered? She choked on that one, putting the wadded tissue back to her eyes and shaking her head as she began to cry. I walked into the bedroom and brought out the box and put it in front of her on the coffee table. By the time I got there she was sobbing, her shoulders shaking as she breathed heavily, dropped the wadded tissue on the sofa cushion and pulled out a fresh one from the box. I waited and finally she settled down, looked up at me, her eyes all puffy and wet from the tears and said, "He was the best. It wasn't he just the sex, which was great, but for a supposed tough guy he was very compassionate, caring, vulnerable just like I am right now." I couldn't believe that she was talking about our rat, but then again everyone has a different perspective on a person, even a weasel like Marco. "Sounds like you might be in love with him." She was looking down with a wadded tissue in her hand, then she nodded slowly and finally said, "Could have been, but there was no future there for me, at least making a commitment to someone who could never provide for me like Don Angelo. Practical even when affairs of the heart were concerned," I observed. "Not a surprise though." I decided to divert my direction to more practical matters. "You were, and I assume Julia, with Marco, and you propositioned me to have sex with both of you. Weren't you worried that your husbands would find out? Are you afraid of that? Is that why you made the gay excuse?" Now the tables were turned a bit, and I replied, "Of course. Your husbands aren't exactly the kind of guys someone would want to take chances with." I paused on the next words. She completed it, "Fucking their wives, not to mention other bonuses." I nodded. Then she said, "It's 0K, all part of the deal. They get to put us on their arm and show us off at functions and when we go to restaurants, and we get to do whatever we damned well please with whoever we want to. No questions asked as long as we keep our part of the deal." A bit of the hardened Margot had emerged again, and she even offered a self-satisfied smile, reached over, patted me on the knee and winked. Chapter 15. Somehow, I wasn't surprised, but I must have blushed. Her hand remained on my knee for a few moments, then she settled back at her end of the sofa and took a drink of wine, savoring it I thought for effect. "You don't feel comfortable with that?" she asked as she put her glass down on the table. "If it works for all of you, that's your business. You got something against liberated women having active sex lives even if they are married? Like I said, that's your business. I haven't got an opinion about it." I needed to redirect this, so I said, "Tell me about the last time you saw Marco, when he came down overnight from Sedona. What happened?" "All right," she replied, her cockiness muted for the moment. "You said this would be tough in so many words." I nodded. "What made happened?" She a deep breath, sighed, and began, "Julia and I did it Louis way with Marco, in one way or another all night. You know, drink a little, eat a bit and do it all over, is that all?" "Pretty much, until he drove his Jeep back to Sedona early the next day." "Just the three of you?" I asked. "Well, yes, for the most part, but someone else was there and watched. Just a harmless mouse who likes to watch and get himself off low suppose." "So, who was the mouse?" "Tagger, our adorable driver and general gopher. He's so cute," she added. Then she remembered, Marco told him that he wanted to have him come up and hang with him for a while. Said the football was great and the views were fantastic, but the only person he had to talk to was the old lady who ran the place and she had all the personality of burned toast. Did they make plans to get together? I know they talked about it, but I really didn't pay much attention. Okay, I said and moved along to the next step. Do you think your life is in danger? I'll show you, she replied and reached down for her purse that sat on the carpet in front of the couch, somewhat under the coffee table. After a bit of rummaging around, she withdrew of this was on my car under the windshield. She handed it to me. I read it. Margot, you are a slut and dead to me. You will be soon. I will make sure of that. Signed, an admirer. After another hour or so of talking, Margot looked emotionally drained. The cocky self-confidence had disappeared over that final hour, and she finally said, leaving her half-empty third glass of wine on the coffee table and leaning toward me, I would love to stay and just snuggle up to you all night. Just that. I slowly shook my head from side to side. It was indeed tempting, seeing her in such a vulnerable way. Well, I'm not sure, maybe it made me feel more affirmed rather than being propositioned flat out by the Margot I had known before our meeting. That sounds very enticing, Margot, but this is not the right time for either of us. I'll consider it if you are still interested after this is all over, but tonight, I just want to make sure that you are safe. She nodded slowly in understanding. I'm going to follow you home. I want you to go directly there. I'll be right behind you until you get to your drive. She nodded, reached down for her purse, stood up, straightened her skirt, and I followed her down to the parking lot. I saw her red Mercedes convertible parked in a visitor's spot closest to the building. Then she put her hand in the purse and pulled out a little black plastic fob on her keychain with a button on it just like the one I carried to remote start the cruise. She the button and the car started, and she waited for about a minute or so and it beeped before she walked toward it. I came up behind her before she got to the car and said, "That's pretty cool. Is it for what I think it is?" The waiting a minute or so before going to the car. You could have used one when they blew up your Mustang. Lucky for you that you said you forgot to lock the door to the apartment and got out of the car right after you started it and was walking back to lock the door when the Mustang blew up. She tossed the little black plastic fob and keys in her palm and said, "The Don's and us wives' cars are all set up with these. Can't be too careful." Pretty clever. How can I get one installed? Talk to Tagger, he did them all. I will, I replied. Pull up to the entrance to the complex and give me a minute or two to get my car and pull up behind you, then pull out on Camelback and go home. And that's what we did. The next day was Friday, and I was to meet with the Dons. I wasn't sure what to expect. Chapter 16. Friday morning before my early afternoon meetings with the Dons, I made a few calls on my secured phone. First to my boss, then to Mark Grant. I had told my boss about Marco on a call that I made while still in Sedona at the safe house. On this call I brought him up to date and told him that there was some speculation on my part that Marco may have compromised his and my position when he purloined the Jeep and came down the hill to Phoenix. I informed him now that I had a meeting with one of the wives that Marco had been with when he came down, and that she had given no indication that she was aware that Marco was a plant, nor that was I, but I couldn't be sure. What about the sons, the cousins, and a palace coup? No evidence of that either, even though I haven't had direct interface with them. As I mentioned before, I think that Marco either was misdirected or attempted to misdirect us for whatever reason. If they are planning a takeover, it's completely under the radar, and the wives are in the same category. I don't believe either pair have any interest in taking over the Don's enterprises. They all seem to enjoy the benefits of it and wouldn't want to go to the trouble. If this is all tunt, then why don't we extract you? Marco is dead, and it appears that whatever threat there was to the status quo doesn't exist anymore. I have 3 concerns. One is that someone tried to blow me up, another is that I believe that someone attempted to frame me for multiple murders, and finally one of the current wives is being threatened with death by a person or persons unknown. So, my empathetic boss asked. So, I replied, that indicates that there is still disruption within the organization. Look, I'm only a go-between, and why would someone try to kill me or set me up for a double homicide? And who would want to harm or kill one of the wives? There was a pause, then, 0K, Dakota, 2 more weeks then you are out of there. I see this as basically your problem, but you have made a point or two about maintaining stasis in the organization. I thanked the son of a bitch and signed off. My call to Mark Grant was a whole different scene. Of course, I had to endure the barrage about losing his job by virtue of helping me out, all the dinners that I owed him and what an idiot I was. I set the phone down on the table while he droned on and on until he finally ran out of gas and asked, "So what do you want now? What can you find out about a Devon Freehold Johnson, also known as Tagger? A sterling member of the community, I am sure." Snide and sarcastic as usual, but I liked Mark like a brother, and we had been through a lot of adventures together, although he would never acknowledge that he enjoyed every hair-raising minute of them. "Come on, Mark." A moment or two of silence, then, "I can tell you about him just a bit now. Has a juvenile record that's sealed. Was in the military, then kicked out. Works for the brother Don Angelo." "Thanks, Mark. Can we get into his juvie records and his military background?" "Juvie records are hard to hack without a warrant, but I'll see what I can dig up." "Military easier, in fact I have it pulled up, at least his training and basic assignments. He was a demolitions specialist." "Thanks, Mark, that's good for 2 dinners. Bring a girlfriend, that is if anyone can stand you and your sour attitude." "I'd say fuck you, but I don't want to give you the satisfaction, buddy." The call was over. As much as I was touched by Margot when she became vulnerable, or perhaps portrayed herself as such, something still bugged me the following day and had been a question mark since she had made the statement on the phone several days before. She said that when Marco had come down, he had escaped from solitary. His cover was that he was staying for a while in a beautiful resort environment until he finished grieving for his mother. Maybe calling it solitary was just a quip, but it still made me wonder nevertheless if he had indeed blown his and my cover. I'm paid to wonder and did. I also wondered if Margot should qualify for an award for Best Actress in Manipulation of a Male. I'm sure that Julia would qualify as Best Runner-Up. I met with the brothers later that day and went through the same routine pretty much with both. "Marco is gone," Don Guido wrote. "You have anything to do with it?" "No," I responded on mine. "Did he kill our first wives?" "Don't know for sure," I responded again. "FMD out who did as we told you before and take care of business." I took a chance. "Why me?" "We know that you can. It is your business while you are here." I just shrugged my shoulders and the note. There was that we again. My meeting with Don Angelo went about the same way, but he added, "I know you met with my wife last night. She is afraid." "Yes," I replied. "Take care of her." He commanded in bold all caps with an exclamation mark. "Will do my best," I replied after burning his blue line. "That's why you are here. Why we wanted you." Something was hinky about this whole setup. Why did the two of them infer that I was, in film noir terms, a torpedo or some kind of bodyguard? I'm supposed to be a low-echelon go-between. And I didn't know why anyone would have wanted me, I was just a fill-in for Marco that he recommended. He pulled out an envelope from his coat's inside breast and pushed it across the table. It was my weekly payment of $1,000. He scribbled something on the pad and sent it over to me. "There's an extra 2 Gs in there for the trouble you had in Sedona." I looked at him and the bill of an Imagine Me hat, nodded, and burned the blue line. The meeting was over. Chapter 17. I decided to go with the flow for the time being, but I was beginning to have doubts about even the outfit's involvement in this. Let's face it, they are pragmatic and will use any resource to achieve their purpose and ultimate objective. I am simply an operative for them and if need be, an assassin, and I always take everything I am told with a grain of salt as I know that they will even use me if it fits the purpose. I made up my mind if this went much farther, I would confront my boss and demand to hear or see the tapes. Right now, though I was interested in one particular party in this whole quagmire, Tagger. Did my best, Mark Grant said, but couldn't get through that veil on his Jamie record. Military, like I said, he dealt with demolitions and got tossed out as undesirable. Was accused of stealing and stashing ordnance, explosives, and perhaps selling them on the open market. Could have gone to Leavenworth, but there wasn't enough direct evidence to take him before a court-martial, so they just kicked him out. Too much trouble to prosecute, I expect. Did they ever prove that he actually had any of that stuff? No, I suppose, or they were just glad to get rid of him. From what I could gather, he specialized in booby traps and IUD disarmament. He paused, and then said, after he got drummed out, he worked for a Phoenix limo service and somehow got recruited into the Don's operation to handle their wives' transportation. Thanks, Mark. You still owe me a couple of dinners for this one. Find that girlfriend to come along. The list is long, just have to make a choice. Let me know. If she is good looking, I'll take her away from you. Of course, he with the usual four-letter word by you. I walked up to Tagger and said, "Hi, I'm Tony Frontera. Thought we should get to know each other since we both work for the same people." Tagger was standing next to the Mercedes that the wives used for excursions into Scottsdale. "Yeah," he said, tipping up the brim off his little black driver's cap. "You are the go-between, the one who almost got B10M up." "Right, that's me," I replied. "Here I am still in one piece." He looked down at the pavement and scuffed his highly shined right shoe around a bit and then offered, "I can set up your car with a remote starter that will let you be sure that it is safe to get in and drive it after it runs for a minute or so. It has a timer on it that beeps after 60 seconds. "I know," I said. "Margot was over a while ago and told me that you could." I noticed a twinge when I said that Margot had been over, and his shoulders stiffened. "I'll tell you where to buy a unit, get it on Amazon, takes a few days and then call me and I'll do the install." "Thanks, man," I replied. "Then, you're waiting for the wives, I would guess." He nodded and said, "Always waiting. Takes 15-20 minutes to drive them over here to shop, do lunch, whatever, then I get to hang out for 3 or 4 hours while they do whatever. It's a job. I get to pass notes back and forth between the Dons. Can't quite figure that out, but it pays well. Just between us, bro, this whole outfit is screwed up from the Dons on down to, well, you get what I mean. I'm beginning to find out." I said that I had to go and began to move toward the parking lot. As I walked away, Tagger said, "Dude, get that unit and give me a call." "What's your number?" "I'll text you mine." I did, and apparently the door was open. I was going to get to know Tagger. I called my boss. "Need a little help. Want to access the juvenile records that are sealed on one Devin Freehold Johnson, aka Tagger." "Oh," he replied, "the driver and gopher. That's the one. Might take a day or two, but we can probably do it. And by the way," I added, "I get the feeling I have been set up on this one. Lots of red flags and they all point back to the outfit. Just putting you on notice, I want to have a leveling session." I had lost my cool but didn't like being put in this position. "Not sure if we can do that, Dakota, just do your job." "Doesn't work that way. Either we meet in the next week and let me listen to the tapes of your conversations with the Dons or videos if they met face to face with you or anyone else in the outfit, or I'll walk, and when I do, I'll blow the whole thing up. I damned near got killed and I'm holding you. I deserve to know what in the fuck is going on and for you to stop screwing around with me. Bakota, he replied, just do your job. You are playing with fire. No, you are. Just remember who I am and what I do and that I have a long memory. In case you don't get it, I'm seriously pissed, and you don't want to be on the other side of that. My boss hung up on me. I think he got the message. Chapter 18. After threatening my boss, I wasn't sure what would happen next, but wasn't that concerned, and frankly about the only thing they could do if I was really a to the outfit was to send someone out with qualifications like mine to, let's say, neutralize me. Been hunted by the best before, and he knew it. Besides, I was being hunted now by someone else, so what would be the difference except that the outfit's assassin would be a lot better? That was, of course, a big difference. That wouldn't happen for a day or two if it did, so I decided to concentrate on the issues at hand. Not a time to be distracted from the mission. Besides, I knew that odds were that that little bastard and I would kiss and make up, though the thought made my stomach roll just thinking about it. The Dons and the situation had for the most part given me an idea what was happening, and I had a pretty good idea that if they were volunteering information, my boss would eventually level with me rather than escalating the situation. Besides professional curiosity and animosity regarding being used, I wanted to be leveled with Don Angelo because I wanted Margot to move in with me. No strings attached as far sexual intimacy went, just so I could protect her 24/7. I had a good idea that she was dealing with a psycho, and one closer to home than she realized, or probably wanted to acknowledge to herself. She was such a manipulator, she was probably knowingly or not egging whoever on. My boss said that I was playing with fire. There was no comparison to the potential explosions that the wife's behavior would create. The next day I took the Chevy Cruze in to have the remote starter and timer removed just so I could have another one reinstalled by Tagger that I ordered the day before and would be delivered tomorrow. Why are you doing this? The technician asked. It's annoying, I replied, but failed to add, just like you. None of my business, but there is nothing wrong with it. Like I said, it's annoying. Never saw one with a timer and beeper. First time for everything. What's it for? Lets me know when the AC in the car has pulled the temp to 0 mm. This is Phoenix, you know, hot in the summer. How does it do that? Magic, I replied. The next day after the new unit was delivered, I called Tagger. He said he would be over the next morning to install it. It didn't take long. He suggested I wait in my apartment until he was finished. I didn't ask any questions as to why. A lot of craftsmen don't want someone looking over their shoulders while they are working. He came up to the apartment after he was finished, and I offered him a beer. He accepted and we sat down and talked for maybe half an hour. He asked me why I was working for the brothers. Just filling in for Marco, but Marco is dead, so I might be around for a while. How do you like it? An easy gig and the pay's good. Just have to put up with their quirks. What about their wives? Beautiful and spoiled, and they like it that way. What about Margot? Ditto, I said. She thinks you're hot. Yeah, I know. What do you plan to do about it? Not sure. I've got a job to protect, and messing around with the boss's wife isn't a good career move. He nodded, took the last swig of beer, took $50 for his trouble and left. If things go as I planned, wait until he finds out that she has moved in with me. That afternoon I took the cruise over to a guy who works on cars for the outfit. In fact, he had put the first unit in the cruise. He was tied up when I wanted it taken out, so he had to go to an independent auto electronics specialist to get it out in time for Tagger to reinstall a unit. He inspected the install and did a once-over on the entire vehicle. "Looks OK," he said as he wiped his hands on a shop rag after he was finished. "Just one thing, there has been another feature added. And that is another remote unit. And it's not up to anything yet but could be sometime in the future and from up to a couple of 100 feet away from the car at any time. What might be hooked up to it? Don't play stupid." A bomb. I was playing stupid and figured Tagger would come up with something novel. "How can it be deactivated?" "Simple," he replied. "I cut the wires that would lead from the remote to whatever it was to activate. I put a little grease, dirt, and gunk over the disconnected wires, and it won't be noticeable to someone unless they get really curious." "How will I know for sure?" "You won't get blown up," he said and laughed, punching me in the shoulder. Somehow that didn't seem reassuring. After the levity, he showed me how I could look under the car and detect if the wires had been hooked up to anything. The wires led to a depression in the floorboard right next to where the rocker panel was on the driver's side. "That's where it would be," he said. "Just check under there either by looking or just put your hand under the rocker panel. If that depression has something in it, give me a call." "You are on my speed dial list," I assured him. Chapter 19. I got back to my apartment and my secure phone rang. It was my boss. "Bakota, I have information about Johnson, that Tagger guy." "Thanks," I replied in a terse manner. After all, our last discussion, if you wanted to call it that, was acrimonious at best. As a juvenile he was a firebug, or at least it seems so, and a pretty good one. Brought up on arson charges several times as a minor but never prosecuted. Not enough evidence. They thought he tried to bum down a former girlfriend's house when he was 17 after she broke up with him. Could have killed her and her family. That fits in with what I assumed. Thanks. There was a pause, and I could hear my take a deep breath before he said, "I owe you an apology for hanging up on you. You are right, you deserve to know what we got you into, and I want you to come back here at your convenience and watch the video of the conference we had with the brothers that got this all rolling, and I'll fill you in on a conference call recording after Marco was killed. It might explain to a degree why we couldn't level with you when we gave you the assignment. It was at their request, but as long as it appears that they have begun to acknowledge that you weren't just a temporary replacement for Marco and that they know what your role is, we think it would be all right to fill you in." "I appreciate that," I replied. "It will make this progress if I am filled in, and I'll tell you where I am going with it as well. If you can come this weekend, I will meet you at my office. I'll make arrangements. Is Sunday at 10 in the morning, all right?" "Fine, I'll be here, and we can get this straightened out." After all the years I have jousted with this man, this was the first time he ever had apologized for anything. After the call, I made arrangements for a flight on Saturday. Given what I about Tagger, it was all circumstantial. He could have just been a lovesick voyeur. Then, there was the installation of remote detonation device under my car. It could have been set up to detonate a stink bomb for all I knew. I doubted it, but at any rate, before I took the ultimate step, I would push him to see how far he would go, and Margot was the button. Saturday, midday, I was on a plane heading east to meet with my boss and hopefully fill in the gaps. I was prompt for my 10 a.m. meeting with my boss. By 10:15 we were in a small conference room with a wall-mounted TV at the end of a conference table. We were seated on either side. "This is the video of my meeting with the brothers," he began. "They both came here together." "Yes. What's with all this animosity and the paper going back and F01th and the gas bummers? Just watch and you will get the idea." "Did they know they were being videoed?" "Yes, but they seem to enjoy the whole thing. They are both quite eccentric, as you have figured out, and I must say, theatrical. The whole thing seemed like a lark to them, although they were candid about the situation." He pressed a remote and the screen came to life, and there they were side by side, the brothers who claimed not to be able to stand being in each other's company. Chapter 20. Don Angelo began. "We have some concerns about someone in your employ who also is part of our organization." "Marco Baker," I heard my boss's voice off camera respond. "Yes," Don Angelo answered. "As you recall, when we set this whole thing up, he was to be a go-between the two of us." He paused and pointed to Don Guido. "That way you would know what we were working on business-wise and staying within the terms of our agreement to maintain peace among the different factions in central Arizona." My boss responded, "An unusual arrangement to say the least, but yes, we agreed to it in exchange for providing you a form of immunity for maintaining order in central Arizona." "And I believe that we have," Don Guido replied. "Not out of violence, but by forming a kind of co-op or collective where all factions benefited rather handsomely from a portion of the profits of our organization as long as they maintained peace among themselves. You see, there can be honor among thieves, especially when there is a profit. And," Don Angelo added, "they are self-regulating. If any of their members become too ambitious or, shall we say, make plans to get out of line, they take care of it themselves and don't involve us. It has worked for several years just as you explained, and when we set this up you told us that this feud between the two of you was basically a stunt," my boss said. "Well, it didn't start out that way. We had major differences," Don Guido explained, "but when we got back together, we realized that if it was believed that our organization was broken into two rival factions, it would be more difficult for someone to take a run on us. Besides, it was kind of cool and kept everyone guessing." "All right," my boss off camera, "so why are we meeting today?" "Your guy Marco, we think he is getting too wise. We think he is cooking up something. Are you asking our permission to have you eliminate the problem if you feel it is necessary, by, how should I say, any means?" "No, we are businessmen, not killers," Don Angelo replied candidly. "Oh yes, we have some enforcers who encourage the payment of overdue debts or encourage businesses to take on our services to guarantee that they will be protected against unforeseen reversals, but we take it only so far. You specialize in the more punitive actions, not us. That is strictly old school, some things our fathers might have done." "I see, so what do you want us to do about Marco?" "We want to take him out of the loop for a while, but have him watched, and see if he is scheming." "Who would replace him?" "One of your people with all of the skill sets to determine if he is planning something fishy, and if so, take measures to eliminate the problem," Don Guido answered. "And one other thing," Don Angelo added, "we want your best operative, but we don't want that person to know the true nature of his mission so that Marco isn't inadvertently clued into what we are trying to determine." "So," my boss said, "you want someone who will come in and basically conclude over time if Marco is indeed hatching a plan, how far it is intended to go, and then eliminate the issue." "Precisely," the brothers replied in unison and nodded their heads. "So, if Marco is planning something, you want to let it play out to a certain degree, giving him enough rope to literally hang himself?" They both nodded. "Well, I don't like the idea of sending someone in there blind, but we will entertain your proposal, and I do have someone who I can recommend. He has all the skill sets that you require. Thank you, Don Guido replied, and both brothers stood up and extended their hands across the table toward my boss to shake. My boss turned off the TV and turned to me, so there you have it. The original arrangement with the brothers has worked in terms of maintaining order in what amounts to a geographical area about the size of Rhode Island that had, up until they had made their original proposition to us, a hotbed of gang violence and feuding. We felt that we had to comply with their terms to maintain that delicate balance, even at the expense of being less than honest vhthu. Obviously, what happened next was that Marco came to you and said that he felt that the sons were about to take out their fathers and take over the operation. You even said to me that if that was the case, to take them out. That was all part of the charade. But what if I would have? I hate to admit it to you, Bakota, but you are simply too smart for that. We knew that once you got in there you would see that the sons had no interest in taking over, a couple of well-heeled ne'er-do-wells. There was simply more to it than that. And Marco all but admitted that he was setting the sons up when he asked me if I had killed them yet. Yes. And why didn't you direct me to make a move on him then? Because we felt it went much deeper than a rat hatching a plot, and that you would continue to dig if we just let it play out. And then someone got to Marco before I could. Changed the whole game plan in a sense, but confirmed that there was more to this than just Marco. And of course, the ex-wives became casualties. That was when the brothers began coming out of the closet, so to speak, by directing you to find out who did it and eliminate them. I sat back in my chair and looked at my boss for a moment, steepling my clasped hands with my index fingers touching under my chin, the way he often did when he was acting superior to me. I guess in a way this whole thing was a backhanded compliment, I finally replied after watching him staring at me for appropriate moments of silence. Bakota, I will never admit it to you or anyone else once we leave this room, but you are the best we have. And, by the way, this meeting was not taped. I would never want that statement recorded. He paused for a moment, then said, "All right, cowboy, get your ass out of here and take care of business." As I walked to the door to leave, my boss added as I turned to face him, "I will contact the brothers and tell them that you have fully briefed. Feel free to communicate with them discretion." I nodded, said yippee-ti-yi yeah, tipped an Imagine Me hat brim, slapped my hip like a real cowpuncher and left. Chapter 21. Now that things were more out in the open, I decided to ditch the Chevy Nels. Didn't need the potential of a bomb under my ass, so I caught a ride back to my place in Sunny Slope and brought back my pickup and parked it in the visitor section of the lot, leaving the cruise in my regular spot. I informed the apartment management that I had done so, and that the pickup had been loaned to me to help a friend move the following week. My next meetings next to their stoves with the brothers were more down to earth. They knew that I knew the whole story now, and we went from there. They confirmed that they wanted to know more than anything who had killed their ex-wives. They were both great women. We, Angelo and I, were just feeling our oats and had too many temptations. Whatever happened to them, they didn't deserve it, and we carry guilt over it, Guido wrote on the blue line pad to me. Make sure someone pays no matter who it might be. I told Don Angelo via the blue line that I wanted Margot to move in with me so that I could protect her. She stays out with other men all mght, why should I be concerned about her staying with you? At least I'll know where she is. I have to be honest, I wrote, she would be a bit of bait as well. I understand, he answered. You using her for bait or her using herself all these years, what's the difference? This could be a lot more dangerous. In case you haven't figured it out, she can be dangerous. My last message to the Dons was not to use their vehicles under any circumstances. Move in with you, honey, you finally came around, Margot said when I called her. Strictly business, I replied. Your husband has been informed. You wanted protection, I'm more than qualified, and I'm confident that whoever wrote you that note is a serious threat, so get over going to bed with me and let's just get over to my place and camp out for the duration. Well, there have been a couple of phone calls since I saw you last. Called me foul names, said he would kill me and hung up. Recognized the voice muffled, but it was a male voice. Look, it's escalating. Put your things together for a few days and call me. I'll pick you up. I do not start or drive your car even with that remote starter and timer. Hide the keys so that no one can find them and try to use the car. I think I am beginning to get scared. I figured this could be just a prank. If you aren't, you should be. Just get your things together and call me. I'll pick you up in a red Ford pickup 20 minutes after I get the call. Give me 20 minutes, a few minutes more, and I'll call, sweetie. 0K, I replied. After we hung up, I couldn't help but wonder why this woman didn't seem to taking this as seriously as it was. It seemed like a lark to her, a bit of adventure, maybe like the conquests that she had instigated and seen through for years, and maybe threats from men that she spurned. She didn't seem to get a grasp on the fact that this was life and death serious. Hell, I was certain that this guy was unhinged, and serious as a heart attack. Later I picked Margot after she called to tell me that she was ready. She was dressed casually but fit to kill and can eat a small pink gym bag. A pickup TMCK, pretty macho. Shut up, I replied. I know that Marco probably told you what I am and what I do. Take my word for this, I plan to save your life and mine as well. No more kidding around. Your smart-ass attitude and come-ons won't mean a damn thing when the psycho who is at the bottom of this comes for you and me. Just cooperate and get over yourself. She didn't say another word all the way back to my place, and it was my real place. I took her to my house in Sunny Slope. All the way she was quiet and sulked with her arms folded in front of her chest. This is where you live? I mean, it is clean and all, but not what I am accustomed to. Couldn't we have stayed in a real hotel with a suite or something like that? Besides that, I was looking when we drove over here, and this doesn't look like the best part of town. It is what it is, and it works for me. You aren't here for the neighborhood, decor, or ambience. I will make you as comfortable as possible. There is a bedroom down the hall on the right that you can use. Sounds a little boring, sleeping solo. Give me your cell phone, now, I asked, rather demanded. I don't want you making any calls. I want whoever is concerned to think that you are staying with me at the apartment. I will say it only once, I will ask, but please just stay here and do as I tell you until this is all over. If you don't, I'll have to handcuff you and bind your ankles. I don't want to have to do it, but I'll tape your mouth closed if I have to, so cooperate. She handed the phone over and sulked some more. I hoped that I had made my point. God only knew with this woman. Chapter 22. I left her at my place, and without a ride or a phone I figured that she would be pretty contained. There were some snacks in the kitchen and libation to take the edge off until I could go shopping for a little more sustenance. Of course, the TV had the normal array of drivel, old movies and what passes for entertainment, news, and sports. I live at the top of Central Avenue at the base of North Mountain. The closest restaurant is about a bit under a mile down Central, a Mexican place called Villa de Ios Santos. Good food and an intimate cantina. When I'm in town I spend quite a bit of my time there, of course, in the role of a construction consultant on projects all over the globe who is often absent for periods of time. Since Margot was wearing heels, I doubted that she would tly walking there since she didn't know that it was even down the street. I told her that I was going to check out the apartment and to stay put and figured that she would. She was still sulky, but that was to be expected. Other than her few minutes of vulnerability several days ago, I was getting sick of her and was beginning to believe the Marco ministrations was just an act. I drove back over to the apartment on Camelback, about a 25-minute ride, and checked things out. Everything seemed pretty normal. I out the cruise. No bomb had been installed. Fortunately, in case anything happened to the cruise like had to my Mustang, my parking space was fairly isolated from the spaces of the rest of the tenants, up against a perimeter wall with vacant spots on either side. On the way home I stopped to get more groceries for my real place since I had a guest and hadn't up during the time that I was staying at the apartment. I enjoy cooking, so I spent a bit of time at the market. I finally arrived home only to find Margot gone. Almost a third of a bottle of 10-year-old scotch was gone as well. Never underestimate a willful woman in heels. You know her? Jimmy the bartender at the cantina at Via asked. I'm afraid so, I replied. Did you kidnap her? Jimmy asked. She has a vivid imagination. She described you to a T and where your place was. Was fairly flying when she got here. I served her one kamikaze on the condition that she wasn't DRMNG, and she fell asleep on the bar where she is now. I don't think she hit her head when she flopped. She kept asking me to call the cops and tried to get the regulars to loan her a cell phone before she passed out. All I can tell you, Jimmy, is that she was a date from hell, and I left my place for a little while and she drained a lot of good scotch and ended up here. Nothing funny going on except for my bad judgment. She seemed normal yesterday when I met her, but today. Well, if you don't mind, get her out of here. This is a neighborhood place, and the restaurant is family-oriented. I know, just give me a minute. All right. She is a looker though if she wasn't so messed up. Try spending a little time with her and the looks wear off and your bar stock disappears. I hope it was worth it, you know what I mean, Jimmy said and gave me a wink as he leaned toward me over the bar while he polished a glass. I'll never learn, I replied and gave my wryest smile. Jimmy nodded, none of us ever do. I didn't waste any time. I went over to the end of the bar, turned her around, bent forward, slung her over my shoulder and marched out with Margot to the applause of the denizens that usually hang out there, many of whom were friends of mine. I was tempted to throw her in the bed of my pickup but thought better of it and put her on the passenger side of the truck and hoped she wouldn't puke during the 5-minute drive home. After I got her to my place and situated, I gave Mark Grant a call to ask another favor. When Margot finally woke up, she was handcuffed to the arm of a chair in my living. What the filk? Margot exclaimed when she finally came around, rattling around the handcuff on her wrist and chair arm. You broke the rules. I don't give a rat's ass about your rules. Keep talking that way and I'm going to cover that trap of yours with duct tape. I feel like hell, she said as she raised her free hand to her forehead. You should. I knew that you were spoiled, but not a drunk. What did you stuck in this place alone and you know, I almost believe that you have some form of a death wish. You seem to be doing everything to put you, and I might add, in jeopardy. That's because I know that he would never do anything to huxt me, I mean, seriously. Who are you talking about? I don't know, maybe my husband, Marco's ghost, a bunch of guys I've fucked, who knows? All I know is that they all loved me and wouldn't hurt me, you may be, but not me. Hey, do you have a fucking aspirin? My head hurts. I walked to my medicine cabinet and got two, then out to my storage shed, and finally through the kitchen where I picked up a glass of water. I delivered the aspirin and water and laid the roll of duct tape I had gotten from the shed on the table next to her chair. I gave her a remote for the TV and retreated to the kitchen to figure out what I would make for dinner. I was seriously considering using that duct tape. Maybe I'm old school, but women with potty mouths always turned me off. She was such a pretty package, but when opened, there was nothing inside, but given all of that, I felt some compelling reason to protect her. Chapter 23. Before we ate, rather good chicken thighs and vegetables I would say, I escorted her out to the kitchen and manacled her to the table leg. Other than escorting her to the hall bathroom for obvious necessities, she was handcuffed throughout the evening and all night secured to the metal headboard of the bed in my spare room. When she awoke the next morning I asked, "Okay, are you ready to play nice? You are a sadist." "Oh, it can get worse." "Now, are you ready to play nice?" Just then the doorbell rang, and I went to answer it while she chained, so to speak, to her bed. It was a cop, and he had a box with him. "Detective Grant asked me to deliver this to you. He said you called him last night and requested it." I thanked the officer, opened the box, pulled out the contents and returned to the bedroom, leaving the instructions on the coffee table in the living room. I was putting the ankle bracelet on her when Margot said, "In the hell is that?" "An ankle bracelet," I replied, "just in case you decide to go wandering again. I can track you from a laptop or my phone 24/7, so don't get tempted." Then I added, "Look at the bright side. If you wear this, I can take off the handcuffs. How long have you got?" I wrote on the blue line and passed it over. 6 months if I'm not lucky, a year if I am. Who knows? 2VFY brother of course, and my wife and a few key people in my organization. No hope? Don Angelo shook his head and burned my note. "Anything that we, or I can do. Settle this mess before I'm gone. I want to leave a clean slate behind for my brother. JVFY son has no interest here, and frankly I don't want him involved, and he never has been. I hope he settles down someday and pursues a legitimate career. If not, he will always be taken care of." I read his long note, looked at him, nodded my head and burned it. The meeting was over. My boss had called the day before on the secure line and informed me of Don Angelo's condition. "This puts even more emphasis on your mission. The death of a principal could put the stasis of the whole situation in the valley in jeopardy." "I know," I replied. "Hate to see the old guy go down though. Shed a tear at his funeral. Now, get to work and don't fuck this one up." My boss was back in his usual demeanor. That was reassuring, made it easier to hate him. Somehow this was all, in a way, beginning to make some kind of sense. I was thinking this over while I was in my Eames chair with my feet up on the hassock in my living room while I watched Margot pace around, sulky as usual with the scotch and water over ice in her hand. She had almost drained the bottle and I figured the next to go would be the "She didn't seem like a bourbon girl." For the last 24 hours she had given me the silent treatment, hadn't spoken a word, which I found refreshing. My secure phone rang, and I went into the kitchen to answer it. "I buy your apartment complex and out the cruise. It has been armed, there is a bomb right in the place where I told you that it would be," our technician said. "Not a surprise. It wouldn't have been set up that way if someone hadn't planned to do it. What do you want me to do about it?" "Like I said, the wires have been cut, it can't be activated by a remote the way it is." I told him what I wanted him to do. He said to give him 24 hours. The next day I drove over to the apartment. Looked around the perimeter. The setup was several units of 2-story units with common areas, and of course, the pool in between. There were 4 apartments on the ground floor and 4 on the top for a total of 8 per building. I paid special attention to my building and inspected it completely. I found nothing to be concerned about. I had an idea that eventually that would change. I called Mark. I want you to call Tagger. Margot looked up at me over her half-empty tumbler of vodka. That little squirrel. I doubt that he'll want to talk with me again. How so? Among other things, the last time I saw him I called him a limp dick. You know he's obsessed with you. So are a lot of guys. Wish even a sadist like you were. We could do some interesting things. Listen, I told you that I was protecting you, but you broke the rules, and as long as you do it will not get better. She shrugged and took a drink. Why do you want me to call him? Tell him that you want him to come over to the apartment. Tell him that you know that he is good at figuring out electronic glitches and I am worthless at it, and you want him to take a look at your smartphone. Is that all? You could apologize for calling him a limp dick. What do I get in return for all of this? We'll stop by your place on the way over and pick up your skimpiest bikini. You get to work on your 10. Give me the phone, Margot said. Chapter 24. Margot did as I asked, and Tagger was to come over the next afternoon at about 2. In the meantime, Margot and I had made our way back to the apartment via her home in Paradise Valley to pick up her bikini. While you are in the house, pick up a few more things, like panties. Are you some kind of a pervert? Possibly, but this is business. Just do it. What about that thing on my ankle? She asked. Stays on. Don't need for you to go wandering, like I told you. What about something for me to drink? All that you have over there are a few bottles of beer and wine. I'll pick something up for you. A good single malt scotch would be nice, at least 10 years old. I nodded. She might have been an alcoholic, but she knew her scotch. Make that 2 bottles, she added. That evening we were at the apartment. Margot seemed more comfortable there for some reason, maybe because it was on the east side of town and not in sketchy Sunny Slope where my house was. I had put together a dinner with things I had picked up on the way over along with her scotch, and we settled down after we ate and began to have a conversation. She asked me, "Hi, do you do what you do?" Might ask you the same thing. No, really, why do you do what you do? She insisted. I've asked myself the same question. I suppose that I can put a lot of rationalizations together, but I've been doing it a long time, I'm pretty good at what I do, and after a while stopped asking myself why. Marco told me you were an assassin, but he exaggerated a lot. He probably did. If you were, could you just kill anyone? I paused for a moment, then finally answered, because this was the first time that I had engaged with her since we had last discussed Marco's death. I would only do something like that if it were for a compelling reason to do the right thing, I suppose. That could be for self-defense, to protect someone from harm, or to stop a potential negative outcome for people in general. I know it sounds a bit trite, but there are bad people out there. So, have you? I'm not sure why you would ask that. If I have, I wouldn't tell you, and if I was dumb enough to tell you that I did, I'd be a damned fool. She swished her scotch around with the ice in her glass. Could you kill me? Frankly, for the last few days I could have been tempted, but rest easy, my job is to protect you, even if I are a pain in the ass. I raised my glass of wine and smiled. She ate with her scotch and smiled in return. Margot slept in the bedroom, and I on the couch. The next day at about noon, after I whipped up a breakfast, I did a bit of staging in anticipation of Tagger's visit at 2. I left the double doors to the bedroom open so that it could be seen from the living room with the bed unmade, sheets disheveled. A few of Margot's undergarments were strewn about as if taken off in haste and left on the floor. The bathroom had all the usual woman's makeup and stuff covering the vanity. Margot didn't pay much attention to me, just kept looking at herself in the mirror in the bathroom. Obviously scrutinizing her makeup or something. About 1:30 I asked Margot to put on the bikini and go down to the pool and lounge. She poured a scotch and took a towel from the bathroom and went to the door. Drape the towel over your legs, at least so the ankle bracelet is covered. I was planning to do that anyway. I don't want anyone down there to think that I am a criminal or anything like that. She flipped the towel over her shoulder, raised her glass in the other hand to me, opened the door and left. At 2 precisely, Tagger rapped on the door. I waited a few moments before answering. "Where's Margot?" he asked. She said there was a problem with her computer. He walked in and looked around, taking in the entire place. "She's down there," I said, and escorted him over to the balcony where we both could see her lounging by the pool. "I think you came out here on a wild goose chase. I didn't know she called you, but the server for our Wi-Fi was doing some kind of maintenance and update or something. Anyway, it all came back up after a couple of hours. I'm sorry, but if I would have known, I would have called you and told you to forget about coming. Want a beer for your trouble?" "No," he said, taking everything in again after we walked back into the living room. "I'm pretty busy anyway and need to get going." "Well, Sony again, but you know how women can be." "Yes, I do. I can't believe that she wouldn't just call me. Then again, knowing her, I'm not surprised," he finished and walked to the door. "Well, we've been pretty busy around here, if you know what I mean." His fists were clenched, and I could see steam coming out of his ears. Chapter 25. I told Margot that we were staying at the apartment. I kept her phone, but she could hang out by the pool with her bracelet on, which seemed to satisfy her as long as the scotch held out. Besides, she my cooking. In the meantime, I kept my eyes out, looking for someone dressed as a maintenance or repair man, actually, a specific person. Nothing happened for a few days. I kept looking, she kept tanning and drinking. I would go out occasionally for groceries and scotch. Margot stopped putting the moves on me. Seems like, given enough scotch, after dinner she just passed out at about 10, then I would pick her up and carry her to the bedroom. I began to wonder if my strategy was off base since nothing had materialized, even though I had set the wheels in motion. I have to admit, this whole thing was beginning to give me a new appreciation for my ex, Darla Gunmings. She is so down to earth, smart, industrious, self-made, and whatever other accolades I can attribute to her. She was just as attractive as Margot, in different ways of course. Physically she was damned near perfect in my estimation. We just lived in different worlds. I was the junkyard dog in her rather refined social circles. I guess that it didn't bother her as much as it bothered me. She was a successful businesswoman who cultivated clients in a variety of social venues, and I just didn't fit in. I like to think of myself as a tough guy, but hanging out at those functions made me totally outclassed, and when asked what do you do, I had to respond that I worked in international construction, and I looked the part. As I sat on the terrace and looking out my window that was on the parking lot side with a pair of binoculars, I self-analyzed, and as I looked down at the poolside at the lush, my roommate taking in the sun, I realized that I couldn't have done better than to be with Darla Kununnings. Such are the things that one considers when in the mind-numbing practice of surveillance. 3 days into this I had drifted off for a bit, unavoidable. I awoke when I heard a vehicle drive into the complex's parking lot. I went to the window on the other side of the apartment which overlooked the lot as I did whenever I heard a vehicle come into the complex. The maintenance man had indeed arrived and began getting out of a Ryder rental van carrying a large canvas bag. I went back to the balcony and called out to Margot down by the pool and told her to come up to the apartment. She raised her hands in a what's going on gesture, and I just said, "Come up, it's important." She finally did. "Get your clothes on. I want you out of here." "What the hell?" "Just do as I tell you. Here are the keys to my truck. Take it and drive to your house and stay there until you hear from me." "Why?" "Because you and I are in danger if you stay here. Trust me and I'll explain later, but for God's sake, just do it." I handed her my tuck keys, and she went to the bedroom to change. 5 minutes later she came out in jeans and a t-shirt with boat shoes on, no socks. "Wait until I tell you to leave," I said as I went to the window overseeing the parking lot. I kept looking down, and about a minute later I said, "Go and don't stop for anything. Just get in the truck and get the hell out of here." I had parked my TNTCK on the opposite side of the building from where Thansa was parked. She left, and I waited for about 20 minutes before I went downstairs. I checked out a corner of the building, then came up and called Mark Grant. "Mark, call the complex," was all that I said. "Will do," he responded. "Send the squad. Hold off for about 45 minutes. Hope you know what you're doing. By the time they get here the problem will be resolved." After the call, I took my Smith & Wesson and walked out the front door and down the stairs. "Tagger, you're busted." The maintenance man turned and looked at me, his hands on the bomb that he was affixing to the corner of the foundation of my complex. I had the Smith leveled at him. "Don't get stupid," I warned him. "Let's go upstairs and talk this over. I think I can get you out of this permanently, but you have to level with me. Are any of these TLUEE corners activated?" "Not yet," Tagger responded. His hands were shaking. "Then, the bomb squad will take care of them. Come on, let's go. Your only chance." He dropped his tools, stood up, SHMGGED, and I motioned him toward the stairs to my unit. "Tell me what's going on. I want to know everything and maybe I can help you. Tell me about Marco first." And for the next half hour or so he told me everything, or at least his version of it. As I thought, he was insanely jealous of anyone who had a relationship with Margot, to the point where he was willing to blow up the building where my apartment was in his rage, Margot, me, and any tenants who were at home when the bombs went off. When he finished, I said, "One more thing, you planted a bomb under my cruise. We're going to go down to the parking lot, and I want you to crawl under it and disarm it." "Can the bomb squad do it?" "No, you put it under there and I want you to disarm it. Get to it and I'll make sure that you are out of here before they show up." "How do I know that you can?" "I'm sure that Marco told you that I work for very influential people and that I can make sure you will be out of here and never face prosecution for this, but you have to do as I say now." We went downstairs. Every tenant in the complex was on the sidewalk surrounding the building, having been evacuated from the building where Tagger had planted the bombs. I pointed to Thansa where it was parked and motioned him to walk over and deactivate the bomb. He looked back at me, I nodded, and he turned and moved forward. I remained on the sidewalk by the parking lot and watched as he slid under the car. I saw him shuffle into place, then raise his arms toward the bomb. I waited a moment and pushed the button of the remote in my pocket. The whole car in a ball of flames. Tagger was indeed out of here before the bomb squad showed up, just as I had promised him. Obviously, he had closed a circuit inadvertently that set the bomb off, or so the police report indicated. I owed Mark Grant at least another dinner, maybe a Caribbean cruise. Chapter 26. It came as no surprise that I was asked to leave the apartment by the management. Seems that they didn't appreciate a tenant having two of his vehicles blow up in the parking lot and his building rigged with explosive charges, not to mention having the bomber blown to smithereens. As the pretense for renting the place had not been required, since all the principal parties either knew who I was or who I represented or were dead, it was no great loss. Besides, now I could work out of my place in Sunny Slope, and that was more comfortable for me. No pool to check out the view though. The Dons and I continued to pass notes and burn them because there was more to this than a couple of lovesick Lotharios obsessed with the boss's wife, and let's face it, besides the Dons, else in their organization knew who I was unless Margot opened her mouth. I thought the note passing and all that was kind of pointless since we all knew they talked and that I there to help with both of their operations, but they liked it that way. Like my boss had observed, eccentric. At the very least though, the Dons to know definitively who was responsible for the murder of their first wives. The arson had the signature of Tagger all over it, but what kind of a motive could he have? Tagger had given me some information about the murders. Indeed, he had admitted that he set the fire, but that he did not murder the women, but he only knew a certain amount. I needed to know more. I let this all roll around in my brain for a few days and finally decided I knew the missing link. It all came around to my pal Margot and her proclivity to talk when sufficiently lubricated with expensive single malt scotch. What Tagger had told me after I caught him booby-trapping the entire building was that Marco had recruited him to stage the arson after the killing of the first wives. Marco had told him that big changes were coming in the organization, and they would be able to move up, and getting rid of the first wives would be a favor to someone who was going to take over one of the Don's organizations. Tagger had asked Marco who, and he had replied that he didn't know specifically, but that he was one of Margot's squeezes and that he figured the two of them planned to take over at some point in the near future. All right, so he had said that Margot was involved more or less. Could be TME, maybe not. Both Marco and Tagger were infatuated with Margot, so it was possible that Marco had said that she was just to get Tagger to go along with the plan. So, if Margot was really involved, who was the mystery person? Finally, I had asked if he had killed Marco and the house mother. He reluctantly admitted to it and had planned to murder Marco since he had watched Marco and Thetwa wives having sex when he had come down from Sedona. The same reason he tried to blow me up Margot drove him crazy with jealousy. Marco had said that he was staying at a great place in Sedona for a while and I decided to go up and get him. I told him that I would come up for a visit and we set it up. I blacked out the cameras and when Marco answered the door, I shot him and then the old bitch that came charging down the hall with a butcher knife. You didn't set me up for the fall on that one. Hell no, I had no idea that you were coming up. Just dumb luck that you almost went down for it. I asked him why Marco deactivated the cameras in the house that morning. I told him that I was playing coming up there and I didn't want anyone to know, since he told me there were cameras in the house when we set it up for me to visit. At least, most of the pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but the mystery man, Margot, had that last piece of the puzzle. I went out from my place and bought a bottle of premium single malt scotch, came back, and called Margot. She answered her phone. I said, "Hey, I kind of miss you." "Most men do, no matter how much of a handful I am," she replied. "That you are, but you are, well, what you are, and overall I find that very appealing." After a pause, "So, secret agent man, what is this call all about?" "Oh, I thought you might like to come over and hang for an afternoon or evening. I've got a fresh of Glenlivet that's never been opened." Tempting, but are you going to handcuff me or gag me? Probably not. Disappointing. Under the right circumstances that could be very stimulating. Well, maybe we can work on that, but for now, I would just like your company. I haven't got anything else going on. How about tomorrow for lunch at your place? You know, you are a damned good cook." "I cook to please," I replied. "Be here at about noon. Seared sea scallops in butter and fresh vegetables." She said that she would be. After thinking about it a little bit, I realized that Margot probably got as much of a jolt from being a flirt and a tease as actually having sex. Well, then maybe not. Chapter 27. Margot came over in her Mercedes convertible and looked as glamorous as ever. We enjoyed the scallops after she had a Scotch rocks and I settled for a glass of passable red. By about 1:30, and several more scotches, she was getting dreamy on the couch sitting a foot or so from me. "I should help you wish the dishes," she said, screwing up her words a bit. "No need. I'll do them later." "So, what do you want to talk about?" she asked and took another drink. "To be honest, maybe a career change." "For you, secret agent man?" "Yes, I'm not getting any younger and working for a government agency doesn't exactly pay very much," she finished my sentence. "This place isn't exactly the Ritz." She waved her hand that was not holding a drink around. "I know, but I figured that I could do better, working with you." "What exactly do you mean, sweetie?" "Before Tagger managed to blow himself up, he told me some big changes were going to happen in Don Angelo's operation and that you were aware of what was going on, and that someone in the organization now was planning to take control." Margot seemed a bit stunned, not sure if it was what I said, or the scotch, or both. I let it rest for a few moments and finally she slowly nodded her head, then took another. "Anyway," I continued, "I know quite a bit about the Don's operations now and, well, I think I have special skills that would be useful after a reorganization." She another drink, thought, and said, "I'm not sure what you have heard or know, but there is a possibility that some changes could materialize within a year. I'm not part of that reorganization. I like my life the way it is without running a business like the brothers do, but there is someone who might be willing to offer you a position when that happens, you know, like, a close friend of mine." "Well, I know that the Dons have some thumb breakers and arm twisters, but no one who offers the specialties that I can." "I'm sure you might suspect that Tagger really didn't blow himself up." She thoughts did pass through my brains, she slurred. "Well, I would never say that I did, but however it happened, it certainly appeared to be an accident inflicted on himself by a, and if you done it, well, not a trace of suspicion," she slurred again. Promising, I thought. I could be useful in situations like that. Like I said, I couldn't make that decision, but I can pass along your interest. "Who would I be dealing with?" "Can't say now. He is very influential, but he has hired people in the past for special assignments like you talk about." "Oh," I replied, "Tagger told me that he and Marco were hired by someone to neutralize the Don's first wives." "Yeah, could have been him. I know he was afraid that if they spilled the beans like they threatened, well, his practice would be, Well, you know, destroyed because it could be connected with the mob. She took another drink. Marco and Tagger, both told me that they did it and got paid for it. Then she giggled, and added, "Mob, hell, those old farts are a bunch of pussies. The Dons, I mean. How did you find out about it, Marco and Tagger and the wives?" "Hell, he told me after they had done it. The guy who put them up to it. All these guys run off at their mouths when they are in the sack and want to impress you. And you never told the Dons?" "God, no. After this is all over and he takes over, I plan to many him. I don't think they would have had the balls to kill him, but they could always have hired someone." She paused, "Like you, for instance, sweetie." Her head began to wobble around a bit, and she put down her glass on the coffee table, spilling it in the process. "Mind if I take a little nap?" "Out like a light." I picked her up and carried her into the spare bedroom and deposited her onto the bed. That was at about 3. She slept until 6, when she finally came around. I had done the dishes and cleaned up the coffee table and tossed the almost empty bottle of Glenlivet. "I don't drink scotch." She put herself together with the help of a new loaner toothbrush and a travel size of Crest that I kept for visitors, and I walked her out to her car. She em'd like she had a headache, no surprise. She looked fit enough to drive and she took off. Chapter 28. The 22 caliber Sean round is almost archaic. It is overshadowed by its big brothers, the 22 long and Magnum. It is usually used for short-range work, like when I was growing up on a farm, for varmints like rats that infested our barn and granaries. It is indeed lethal, though, for humans in the hands of someone who knows how to use it. A classic hitman's choice. It has enough punch to penetrate a skull but then slows down and starts spinning, tumbling the brain's gray matter to mush. Additionally, when fired from a relatively long barrel pistol or one with a silencer, it has a fairly quiet report. I met with Don Angelo at the restaurant at one end of the table in front of the 6-burner gas stove. "I know who was responsible for your ex-wives' deaths." "You sure?" "Yes. I don't need to know any more, but please take care of the issue." "I will." "And he is a threat to you and your organization as well." "Well, best we get that business taken care of. You have my blessing." I nodded, and we burned our respective blue lines. A few days later I parked down on Central Avenue at about dusk. I was about a block away from a high-rise building. Behind the building was a 3-story parking garage for the tenants and visitors. Most everyone had left for the day when I walked into the garage and climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor and found a Lexus in a reserved space. I approached the Lexus and pulled out a little tool from my pocket that tire changers use to remove the air valve from the stem of wheels before changing the tires. I dropped to my knees, took the cap off the front right tire's valve and unscrewed it with the tool. There was a whoosh of air and the tire went flat. I retreated to the Stainville, positioned myself under the staircase and waited. About half an hour later the owner of the Lexus got off the elevator on the 2nd floor and crossed the garage toward his car. He was carrying a briefcase and wearing an overcoat. He bleeped the Lexus and the doors unlocked and the interior lights went on. He opened the back door on the driver's side and put his briefcase on the seat, off his coat and laid it over the briefcase. Then he got into the driver's seat and started the car. The Lexus sprang to life, and he put it in reverse and began to back up, but it became immediately obvious that he had a flat tire, right front. He shook his head from side to side, hit the steering wheel in exasperation and got out of the car. He walked around the Lexus and saw the flat on the front. He leaned down to inspect it more thoroughly. That's when I up behind him and shot him in the back of his head with a Ruger 22 caliber target pistol loaded with a .22 short. I got home in time for the late local news. A noted Phoenix Atomee was found dead this evening in a parking garage behind the building where his practice is located. Mark Ball was shot execution style according to Phoenix police on the scene. The reporter went on to explain that Ball represented numerous defendants in a variety of criminal and civil cases and that it was easy to speculate that someone unhappy with his representation might have been responsible. I muted the TV. I hate local news. I switched over to Turner Classic Movies and settled down to watch a film noir classic. Chapter 29. The next day I got a couple of calls. One on my secure phone from my boss, who I filled in on what had transpired the night before. He had no problems with it. The whole idea was to protect the Don's organizations from disruption. The was from Don Guido. "Angelo and I want a sit down, face to face," he said. "We need to level with you about a few things." That's refreshing. I've felt like a mushroom during most of this assignment. Everyone, including my own organization, has been keeping from me in one fashion or another from the beginning. Where can we meet? I knew for whatever reason, they wanted to maintain the illusion that they were not speaking or in each other's company. Why don't you both come out to my house? It's out of your neighborhoods and I don't think my neighbors would care who you are. Sounds all right. We set up the meeting. 2 days later the Dons arrived at my house, together. We sat down in the kitchen around the table. I had a jug of Italian red wine opened and glasses, old country style. Not wine glasses, just tumblers. Some sliced bread, prosciutto, cheese, balsamic vinegar, and olive oil were available on a platter and in small bowls in the middle of the table. Glasses were poured all around and a salute was made. Everyone nodded as they took a first drink. Don Angelo began. "First off, I wish to tell you and your organization that I am not dying. He glanced at his brother, came up with that to ferret out whoever in our organization was getting too ambitious. I felt relieved. I really liked both of them, quirks and all. We believe now," Don Guido said, "that we can move forward without concern, thanks to you." "I appreciate that," I replied. Then I added, "Don Angelo, I'm relieved to know you are not in danger health-wise." "Well," Don Guido said, "we agreed a long time ago that if anything happened to either one of us, the other would consolidate the organization and continue on. Thankfully, you don't have to be concerned about that now." "There is one thing we want to know," Don Angelo said. "And what might that be?" I asked. Don Angelo replied, "My wife, Margot, was she involved? I mean, really planning this whole thing?" I thought for a few moments. I replied, "Then, she knew about the wife's murder after the fact from what she told me. Marco, Tagger, and I suppose Ball told her about it?" "She said that she didn't tell you to protect Ball." Don Angelo dropped his head a bit and said what seemed to be, curse words in Italian. Then he said to me, "What can you do about this?" I fiddled around with my glass for several moments before responding. I raised my head and said, "Don Angelo, I think this is a domestic dispute between you and your wife. With all due respect, this is not part of me job description to resolve those types of issues." Don Angelo slowly nodded, took a drink from his glass, and said, "I suppose that you are right, this is my business, I will resolve it." Other than a final salute, and half a platter of meat, cheese, and bread being gone, the business was finished. The brothers left. I immediately, Margot, went to my bedroom, and pulled out $5,000 in my stash cash that was there for just in case. "Get your clothes together in a carry-on bag and do what I tell you as quickly as you what's going on. Look, Your life is finally catching up with you, and I'm sure your days are, unless you get out of town now. Someone killed Mark Ball, and now you are telling me that I'm in danger. Yes. What should I do? Do as I say, get a small roll-on or a sports bag full of necessities and meet me at the airport, Terminal 3. Call me when you get there. Do it now. I'll be in ticketing. In an hour I can be there. Just do it, I said emphatically. I met Margot at the airport and gave her an envelope with $5,000 in $100 bills in it. Your husband knows that you knew about the murder of the ex-wives and covered up for Ball. How? I had to tell him, but he already that you were involved somehow, but even though one think you are a user and manipulator of anyone who has a penis, I'm giving you a break. She looked down at the floor and her shoulders began to shake. I grasped them both to steady her. Take the money and get the next flight out of here to the most innocuous destination possible. Don't use your debit cards or credit cards, they can be traced. Don't call Julia, me, or anyone here. Buy a burner phone at Walmafel. Throw the one that you have now away before you board in a public waste basket. Not at the gate that you are leaving from, another one at a different gate with a flight to a different destination. You really think that I am in that much danger? She was beginning to shake again. I steadied her again until she settled down, then hugged her for reassurance. Yes, in so many words, he asked me if I would take you out, and I don't mean on a date. I saw the look on his face. He'll find someone else to find you and do it. Just get out off here and lie low. And by the way, he's not dying, the brothers came up with that to get Ball to play his hand, and I would guess to see if you were involved somehow. I don't know where to go. Just go, it doesn't have to be that far. Just get there and stay down. And for God's sake, don't screw every guy who finds you attractive, and stop running off at the mouth when you drink too much. Become invisible. What will I do for money when this runs out? Get a job. Waitress, bartender, server, and I wouldn't even suggest what you are really good at. She nodded, raised her head, leaned forward, and kissed me on the cheek, then went to the ticket counter. Maybe it was my good deed for the day, or maybe I was just another victim of Margot along with Marco, Tagger, and Ball, not to mention Don Angelo and who knows who else. I got back to my modest bungalow in Sunny Slope. It was a refuge and I felt that my assignment was over. It was a bit late, but not too late, and I sat down in my Eames chair, pulled out my phone and called Darla Cummings. My ex, I've missed you more than ever, I said when she answered. I thought you would never call, she replied. Epilogue: my dance with the Dons was over, the back and forth in front of the stove. I'm not sure if they found another go-between or if the outfit recruited one to take my place. Once I'm out of an assignment, I find that just walking away works best for me. Darla Cummings and I got back together. She agreed not to drag me to her networking functions, and I agreed not to take her to biker bars for lunch, even though I think the food is underrated. We agreed on Via de Los Santos since we both liked their Mexican food and she liked Jimmy the bartender and Mike who worked late afternoons and evenings. She would come over to my place on alternate weekends and I to hers, and things worked out fine. She likes my cooking too, so all culinary bases were covered. All the other bases were too. It felt good again. It was about 5 months later that I got a call from Mark Grant. He suggested a lunch. I agreed, and of course I would buy since I owed him. Lost count how many, and then there was the Caribbean cruise that he hadn't held me up for yet. She got it, he said. Who? Margot, in St. Louis. Not surprised, I replied. She was going down that road from the beginning. Looks like Don Angelo found someone who tracked her down. No, seems from what I have been able to gather from the lead detective there, it was the wife of a married guy that she had taken up with. He had bucks and his wife had a .32 automatic. She killed them both. I shook Illy head slowly back and forth. You play close to the edge long enough, and eventually you fall. It always to work out that way. Then I reflected on how close I had been to the edge all these years, and as I had in the past, I set it aside and on.